Welcome to the Soulfull Sound podcast. This podcast is about celebrating the leaders, teachers, and coaches who guide fellow humans to connect, heal, and discover themselves so they can express their gifts into the world. I am Simone Niles, a coach, sound healer, vocalist, and author. Thank you for being here with me today. In this episode of the Soulfull Sound podcast, I am joined by a beautiful soul, Alexandra Rigazzi-Tarling. Alexandra is a professionally trained opera singer with over 20 years of international performance and teaching experience. She trained at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama in London and the Zurich Opera Studio, studying the workings of the human voice and its effect on the body and mind. Alexandra has been a qualified sound therapist for the last 10 years and a tutor for the College of Sound Healing. She offers sound therapy and healing as a complementary therapy, as well as teaching courses and workshops on the subject, specializing, though, in using the voice as a healing tool. Alexandra has taught singing and a system she calls singing therapy and voice reconnection. She teaches this throughout Europe as a workshop leader, working to promote the many benefits of singing for stress relief and other conditions like dystonia, Asperger's, and dementia. In this episode, Alexandra opens up about her journey from opera to sound therapy and the importance of being authentic and aligned with your truest desires. She speaks on her role as a sound therapy trainer and her approach to balancing the science and theory with the intuitive and spiritual aspects of this healing modality. Tune into our sounding experience and feel free to join in. I am so excited to welcome today Alexandra Rigazzi-Tarling. She's a voice and singing coach, sound therapist, and teacher for the College of Sound Healing. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
And you happen to be my teacher. You are my first introduction into the formal side of sound healing, where I got my qualifications years ago. Imagine that. That's awesome. So I'm so excited to have you join me today and really honored that you're spending some time with me. So thanks.
It's a pleasure.
Yay.
Pleasure is all mine, indeed.
Yes. So I'd love to know what you're doing, talk about your work, tell us all about where you are right now.
What's happening?
Yeah.
Well, lots of things, as usual. I'm, as you said, a voice coach and a singing teacher. So a lot of my clientele come for a basic singing lesson, whatever a basic singing lesson is. Mm-hmm. I work as a sound therapist. So I work with sound with clients with all sort of manner of illness or just for general well-being. I teach for the College of Sound Healing, as you mentioned.
Yep.
And we've just come to the end of a round of training now. So some graduated and moved on to the next phase. Some
Amazing.
I'm still marking case studies for them.
Yes.
But
I remember those.
You remember those, indeed. So that's just stopped. And actually summer is here. So I'm having a little bit of a break, which is quite nice.
Oh,
I'm
nice.
still continuing with clients and my practice, but actually in the summer, everybody just disappears and goes away.
The time.
So I take a bit of time, indeed. And that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Brilliant.
And of course, lots of sound baths and sound meditations. I work out of Virginia Water Community Centre, where you did
my training. Yeah.
And we've put on some extra sound baths for the summer because people come out in the summer, it seems.
For sure.
So, yes, we've been doing a lot of that. And, just generally living it, really. Living it and enjoying it and seeing what happens.
Absolutely.
And now I'm here with you.
Yay! Being very present and in the moment. We had a beautiful bit of an impromptu sounding not long ago, which was so wonderful to get our energy really flowing and aligned for this. So it's really beautiful. I was so happy to do that. We haven't sounded together for a while, so it's lovely to come back.
A couple of years.
Come back together and do that. And I know you have a background. You do teach voice and also the sounding side of things, but you have a background as an operatic singer. So tell us about that and how you've come about to where you are now.
Yeah. So, for me, singing was, that was my life, really. That was everything at home. You know, we sang church choir. My dad played guitar and sang. So everything we did it was a very singy type of house. My mum used to sing to me all the time as a child. So it was just the most normal thing for me. But actually, growing up, my mum is also a therapist and healer, so I always had that complementary side to everything. So because singing was my life, I decided that that's what I'd like to do, going forward for my career. So I trained actually at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama in London.
Right.
I went there when I was just 18, so really young, straight out of school. And,
so like 3 years ago?
Oh, Simone. So kind.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, not quite 3 years, but
You look fabulous.
oh, well, so do you. That's what we were
you.
saying.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, yes, I decided to study opera because I really enjoyed classical music. I enjoyed, popular music and all music, really. To be honest, I liked it all. But I'd had singing lessons for a number of years. And actually, I think, when you have singing lessons, you're often pushed in a more classical direction. So again, it just seemed normal. It was just evolved that way. And then spent 7 years training in London to be an opera singer, and then went off to Zurich for a year and worked at the Opera House there, and then moved to Italy and lived there for 5 years, and all the while sort of singing and working with various agencies and sort of, whatever was going on there, doing lots of stuff. I was married to an Icelander at the time.
Wow.
So we used to go to, he was a singer.
Okay.
And we used to go to Iceland and travel around and do concerts. So, everything was about singing. But, it's quite a difficult world, and there's lots of gaps between work and I think it's what we were talking about earlier, this sort of idea when you're growing up of finding what's authentic for you and, finding your place in the world and being, I guess, genuine, and having been brought up in an environment where looking after yourself and maintaining levels of happiness, self-worth, all of these things were really important. I was taught that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I was very lucky, actually. And actually, I think as a singer or a working singer, it's very hard to maintain those qualities because it's a highly critical environment. So you're constantly trying to please people. It is the definition of a people pleaser, literally. You wait for the applause, you hope the performance goes well, you hope you get the next audition. You're constantly trying to please people. And I think after a while, this really ate away at me. This was very difficult. It was very hard to find my voice as well. You're constantly being trained. People are telling you what you need to do and how you need to sound. And actually, in the end, when I moved to Italy, finally, I sort of took myself away from all singing teachers and coaches and just actually sat with my voice. I was living on my own. My ex-husband, was off doing other things of a singing nature. And it was just me, the Italian countryside, my piano and my voice. And that was a really interesting time for me. It was about stripping away everything I'd learnt and getting back to my natural voice, which I think I'd just lost along the way. I could sing. I'd always been able to sing. I could always make a good sound, whatever a good sound is. A pleasing sound, shall I say, for the classical music industry of the Western world.
That's right.
The system that we fit into. So I just went back to basics and changed from soprano back to mezzo-soprano, where I'd started all along, all those years before, and refound my confidence and myself through shutting everybody else out for a while and saying, right, what do I want?
Yeah.
And I have to say that was probably one of the most sort of profound times in my life. I probably didn't realise it then. I was just decided to go back to my instinct instead of listening to everybody else, the agent, the singing teacher, the whoever.
Yeah.
And actually then we moved to the north of Italy and again we're working still as singers. And it got really tough. I was constantly challenged again by sort of employees to be a certain way and to be more charming on stage, to be more this, to be more that. And I just thought, you know what, this isn't me.
Yeah.
This isn't me anymore. So to cut a long story short, I moved back to London. Mm-hmm. I had one sort of job here. I was singing in London in an opera. And I was due to, perform in this opera. We had a 3-night run. It was in Greenwich. And I lost my voice completely. I got ill, picked up something from one of the cast members, completely lost my voice. And it was absolute hell. It was just, the way you're treated. They wanted me to inject steroids into my throat, all of this stuff. And I just thought, you know what?
Yeah.
It's not worth it. This isn't worth it. This isn't right. Something here is not right. So I stopped.
Yeah.
I stopped singing, stopped performing. And I remember going back to my parents' house and sitting there and just saying, right, what are we going to do next?
Yeah.
And my mum said, well, what do you see yourself doing? What else would you like to do? And I said, I don't know, because I've always sung.
Yeah.
That's what I've always done. And I said, I like the idea of helping people. I like the idea of working with other people to assist them in some way, maybe like counselling or maybe something. But I wasn't sure what I wanted. Anyway, a couple of weeks later, I was milling around at home still trying to decide what I was going to do for the rest of my life. I was about 27, 28 then probably. So I've been approaching 30, I can't remember exactly. And my mum, again, a big part of my life, my mum. She came home.
Mine too. I love mums.
Oh, they're just, if you have that relationship with your mum, just really lucky. And I have to say, even now, all these years later.
That's beautiful.
I'm really blessed. And she came home with a little bit of paper and she said, look this up. It's sound therapy, sound healing. She just have a look. I don't know what, I said, what's that? I don't know what that is. Little did I know, sound healing, everything is sound healing, isn't it? As long as it has a loving intention. But, it's something I'd never come across in terms of terminology.
Sure.
And it went from there. I looked up sound healing, came across the College of Sound Healing. Other practitioners at the time, Jill Peirce in London, just suddenly stepped into this world of a different way of using the voice, about sort of toning, using the voice for pure tone, for healing other people, for healing ourselves. And that was really the change point. It was like a massive sort of turn. I mean, I can't even explain it. It literally went from one way of using my voice to the complete opposite, stepping away from the ego, moving out of how we sound, but more about how we feel, and how our sound affects others.
Yes.
When we're working with them. So I trained then with Simon Heather and did the practitioner training that you did with me.
Yep.
And used to go up to, he was in Stourbridge at the time, and did these 5 weekends over the course of, I think it was about 18 months, it was slightly long with him. And did workshops and so on, and just knew that was, I'd found my place.
Yeah.
And decided very quickly that that's what I wanted to teach, and that's what I wanted to spread the word with.
Yeah.
I knew straight away, and there happened to be a tutor training happening, and I joined it quite early on, and haven't looked back, to be honest. And actually that has informed and defined everything else that I do, whether I'm, working with a therapy that I call voice reconnection, which is getting people back to their natural sound, whatever that is. It's very difficult if somebody comes for a singing lesson, they want to sound a certain way. My question is, how do you sound? What do you have to offer, instead of trying to fit into some other sort of system? Exactly.
Box,
Let's just discover what you have. And some people just come with the voice reconnection, or what I used to call singing therapy. Said, I know I have a voice, but I've always been told to be quiet. I've been put down. And I used to see, I knew myself from my own training, and very often working with teachers that were just full of fear, and projecting fear. And, just feeling made to feel awful about my voice, sort of trying to suppress tears whilst having a singing lesson. What a way to sing. horrible things. So I could really relate to feeling completely suppressed vocally. And then the voice morphing into something else because I was holding down all of this other stuff, and then the voice changes. So for years of sort of observing this, I realised that people are, or their voice is a reflection of who they are. And actually now, after several years of working this way, I understand that it's possible to diagnose people's health, thought patterns, many different areas, just by listening to how they use their voice, the sound, the quality of their voice. Someone comes for a session, I can tell very, very quickly what we need to do and how I can assist them. And that gives me enormous pleasure because as they start to develop their voice, their lives change. And I do say to people sometimes, okay, you've chosen to come and work with your voice. And as I say to people that come on the sound healing course, you've chosen to come and work with this form of healing. Please do expect for your life to change.
Yeah, of course. Gosh, don't I know it.
People don't believe me, though. It's really funny. They don't believe me. And then after a few, whether it's the training course or whether it's sessions, their lives start to change. Yeah. And something inside of them, something inside of them says, develop your voice. And they come and they just say, I don't know why, I just feel like I want to try it. I don't know why I want to try it. And they're listening to their inner voice. Yeah. And the inner voice works hand in hand with the sound that we make.
Yes.
And that's what I work with. It's aligning people's inner voice to their outer sound or their composite sound, the sound that they make, which reflects everything else that's going on with them mentally, physically, emotionally.
So many nuggets you've just dropped. Oh my gosh, I don't know where to start. That's beautiful.
Well, there are many things, as I said to you in the beginning, but I have to say, even though there are many avenues of working in this way, for me, it all comes under the same umbrella. As people often say to me, oh, so you're a singing teacher and you're a sound therapist. Oh, so you do both things. Oh, and you do, sound baths. So it's all lots of separate things. And I'm like, no, for me, it's all the same.
Different modes of expression.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Completely.
And finding your way to peel away those layers of the conditioned self, to find that small part of you, that voice within, that is ultimately what will take you to your happiness, your evolution, your ultimate, sort of, I don't know, nirvana.
So I'd love to touch on something that you said, because you spoke about inner voice, and a lot of people might not necessarily know what inner voice is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is that for you? What is the inner voice?
So the inner voice, most people would probably relate to the inner voice is that dialogue that runs in your mind inside as you're living your life. So that dialogue can be sort of motivational speech. Come on, I can do this. Or with a lot of people, it isn't. With a lot of people, it's
negative dialogue.
Negative. You look fat today. You're not pretty. You're not going to be good enough. And the inner voice has usually been created by, as I said, by conditioning. I think it's rare that people come into this world with an inner voice that is self-harming. Usually people have been told all of these things and they form an inner voice, an inner dialogue based on how they've been conditioned. Yeah. It's that voice that it's talking away, it's saying one thing to you whilst you're saying something else. So very often, the most positive people outwardly, their inner dialogue can be very self-destructive, and that's what's driving them to have this outer, sort of perceived confidence. The problems, I think, that at least what I find is when the inner dialogue and the outer are so misaligned, and then other problems start to creep into people's lives, whether that's illness or just feeling like things aren't right for them in whatever way that might be.
Yeah. And how do you go about aligning it? Because if the inner dialogue is sometimes negative, you're not saying that you want the outside expression to match that.
No,
you're wanting it to be a positive experience. So how do you go about aligning that inner and outer?
So a lot of the work that I do with people when it comes to vocalizing is actually looking at what the inner voice is saying. So it's actually really being very honest. And I always say to people when they come for a session, I'm quite a strict therapist. The work is done between the sessions.
Yes.
So they're given homework and they're told and asked to go away and observe what the inner voice is saying at various parts of the day or during various experiences. Once we've pinpointed what the inner voice is up to and what the conditioning and the program actually is, then we can start to reprogram that. And that's done in various ways. It can be done through a combination of sound healing, voicing, affirmations. But it's about finding really what the inner voice is up to and why it has become that way.
Yeah.
So people have to do a lot of searching back and looking at what's happened in their life, who's told them, whose voice is it, who are they hearing when they, when it's sort of destructive patterns. So there's a lot more to it than just sounding. However, the sounding in itself, actually using the voice, whether that's singing songs or just literally, as we did earlier before we started recording, toning, sounding, allowing people to actually just sound. So, when someone sings a song or they come with the idea that they want to sing a certain song, that's quite hard to say, sing a certain song.
Yeah, good tongue twister.
They usually have an idea in their mind of how they want the song to sound. And that's usually based on someone they've listened to singing that song. So really, they're not looking to sing the song for themselves. They're looking to perhaps imitate somebody else. So what I try to get people to do is what I call vocal play. So we start with something like the Shruti box, which if people are not familiar, the Shruti box sounds like this.
It's like a mini harmonium, really.
Like a mini harmonium, exactly. And I just get them to start sounding. So sounding might be anything from, laughing, giggling, just feeling anything they want to do. So, it could be just something like this. Ah, just a simple ah. E. And I just say, let's just sing some vowels. Let's just sing ah, e, oo. Let's just sing that. And gradually, depending on obviously who I'm working with and how comfortable they are, I gradually get them to develop these sounds. And then we start sort of toning along together. We make up sounds, songs. So they're really investigating what's in their own voice box, I guess. It's
also like you're just kind of giving them permission to release, to let out, to let go, whatever comes out.
Exactly.
Whatever comes out is right now.
Exactly.
And finding that as a way into whatever else is there.
Exactly. Because very often there's a lot of superficial stuff that needs to be cleared. So as soon as somebody starts, if somebody hasn't done that before, they might tone a couple of sounds and then they just stop because they've run out of oomph. We work a lot with breath and diaphragmatic breathing so that people can learn to expand as they breathe and really feel that the voice comes from deep down inside. If we're looking at voice, technically, it's not a technical singing lesson. It's far from that. It's not about, throwing breath at the voice and looking at all the finer tunings of opera or contemporary, whatever you're doing. It's not about that. It's getting away from all of that.
Yeah.
And it's about saying, how do I sound when I'm just allowed to sound?
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Very often people have an emotional response.
Yeah.
Very often people just, at first they just clam up. They cannot cope with it. So we make it fun. It's some people have never been allowed to sound.
Yeah. It's interesting because at the end of a lot of the sound baths that I run, I do a bit of sounding where it's a bit of a call and response so people can integrate their own healing. And I've had a couple singers come along to this and they're comfortable, singing saying anything. You put them on stage, you're like, wow, no problem. But it was really interesting, the feedback, one in particular saying, I sing all the time, but you asked me to sit and sound in this space was so vulnerable. That I felt like I was actually being seen in a way that I'm not seen when I'm standing on stage to perform. And I love that, because it's really what you're saying is it's not about the singing, it's not about the performance, it's not about what supposed to sound pretty. It just is about what is, and that authentic sound that, you know, we all have within us.
And at the end of the day, what is a nice sound? What is an ugly sound? What is a pretty sound? I always say to people, you know, I've had a couple of people come that say, okay, you say you can teach people that are tone deaf. I'm here, teach me. And I'm like, well, hang on a second. Can I just check which system we're working with? Are you referring to tone deaf within the Western system of music, where we have a set sort of scale,
these are the things to pitch to.
There are semitones and tones, and or are we talking about the East, they have different scales, they have quarter tones? Can I just check what we're talking about here? And they look at me like I'm crazy. I make my point, you know, we're trying to fit into a system. I'm sorry, but you know, you've seen the squirrels in the garden this morning.
Yes.
When the squirrels are hungry, they'll sit on the fence and they'll cry, and they'll make this noise.
And you go out there and feed them.
I go out there and feed them. They know what they're doing. But they're not thinking, how do I sound?
No.
They're thinking, I need food. And when we were babies, that's what we did. You know, we cried for food, we cried for love, we cried when we were in pain, we cried when we were frustrated. And our mothers hopefully knew the difference with those cries.
Sounds, There's a lot of research around that particular subject. Books written now about the language of babies. It's very different.
But I think, you know, even before we started to analyse it. We know this. So where does it change? And my work, in many ways, depending on who I'm working with or what the workshop is about looking at where we stopped that free sounding. And very often, you know, it's when we started school, we were told to be quiet, we were told to conform. And yes, of course, there's an element of conforming. Of course there is. We have to, you know, be quiet and let other people talk, and we have to learn to listen and receive and give and so on. But, you know, sometimes we just need to sound, and we're told not to. And it's the same with any sort of grief, you know, or I was speaking to a client this morning who's just gone through surgery, and she said she can't stop crying. I was like, that's fine. Just keep allowing the body to sound. That's okay. There's this whole sort of, it doesn't even have to be crying. You can be laughing, but there's this whole thing. We shouldn't be too loud. We shouldn't be too, you know, step into anybody else's space. We're sounding beings. That's what we do. And I honestly believe that a lot of the illness that we encounter is because we are blocked and we're not flowing. We're not allowing ourselves to sound our joy, our pain. You know, we talk a lot about the negative because people come with illnesses, but when's the last time you had side-splitting laughter? You know, that feeling where you ache because you've been laughing so much.
And the tears roll down your face. You can't just help it.
Exactly. And I think, you know, it's just this, we're all so serious. And what happens when you get someone to sound and voice? And I do have some very funny exercises that I get people to do. People particularly like the raspberry blowing, but I don't normally get them to do that on the first session. I think they would never come back ever. But it's amazing how, you know, just blowing a raspberry, you wouldn't think twice about it when you're a kid.
No.
But as soon as, of course, you grow up, you get to puberty. No, why would I
make that funny sound?
Yeah, the raspberry is the first stage of speech. You know, a baby puts its tongue forward, starts to make sound. And so it's fundamental that the tongue is in the right position, the jaw is released, the pharynx is open, the air is flowing, it's optimum. So, I have all these sort of crazy ways of getting people to sound, and depending on the person, you know,
and their conditioning and all of that.
Yeah, we use different things. But, so for me, that is sound therapy.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
That comes under voice, you know.
So I have a slight... it might just be the wording, and I the reason that I've come up with the whole I guess the idea of soulful sound, and that's soul full of sound, is because I feel that we all have a natural state of bliss that and state of harmony in each and every one of us that has its unique sound. And a lot of the work that I'm doing is helping people to come back to that sound. in that, it then comes and ripples out, as you say, from inside out into everything that they do, feeling more connected with who they are, being able to express their gifts into the world without apology. And so when we speak about the word inner voice, I do make a distinction personally between inner voice and inner dialogue, because I think the inner dialogue is very much about the conditioning, as you've said, very much about that, those things that we've been told or heard, or the influences, and all stored in our unconscious mind that's filtered out into the world. For me, inner voice goes into a deeper state, a deeper place of knowing and being that is real and is true. Yeah. And that is really who we are in our perfect state.
But thank you for saying this, because for me, the inner dialogue is how we detect the inner voice. And then once we've worked with that dialogue and we've start to align back to, positive, if we can, then I feel the dialogue becomes
it's that the filter in a way.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it? The terminology, inner voice, inner dialogue. For me now, my inner voice, there's still an inner dialogue for sure. I don't think we ever get.
No, as long as we're alive, we have that happening. Yeah,
exactly. But we can be aware of it. We can monitor it. We can try to look and say, okay, so why am I feeling like this? Come on, self. What's the matter with you? What's going on here? What are you really afraid of? Because it always leads us back to the same thing. Usually we're afraid of, it's just fear-based, isn't it? Whatever that would be. But once we get through that, we get to that stage, then the inner voice for me is that small voice that comes and is very quiet. It's a vibration. And it says, that's okay, that's the right direction for you.
Yeah.
That's the voice that leads you on your, what I like to see, your higher path, that path that leads you to ultimate well-being.
Yes.
It's that little voice, or that feeling of, for me, it's hard to describe, I suppose, because everyone feels it differently. The inner voice for me is a feeling of contentment. Yes, that's okay.
Yeah.
I feel okay. I feel balanced about this. If I feel fear, if I feel uncertainty, I question as to whether it's right for me. And so the inner voice for me is that feeling of, no, this is right. Even if it seems absolutely absurd at the time, but no, this feels like the right decision. Which one should I do? This one? I get more of a feeling of this sense of breathing that I do with people, this sense of,
okay, and release.
There's a release and a relief and a feeling of, yeah, okay, we're okay with this. Even if it's not the outcome that we think right now is the right thing, there are different stages. So the inner voice is leading you to ultimate happiness and well-being, perhaps. Or, perhaps you're already happy and well. So it's keeping you there.
Yeah. So you're talking a lot about that tapping in and tuning in, and I agree. This is not, the inner voice tends not to be the one that's shouting. You need to create the environment or the silence in order to really listen up and tune in. And as a trainer and teacher, because obviously you do train and teach people to go into the modality of sound healing and sound therapy, which obviously I've experienced with you. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, and you did a great job, and I'd love to know your thoughts on this, is balancing the science, and I would go as far as saying as the head and the scientific side and all the theory behind it, because those things are important, and then coming over to the heart where the intuition resides and where you're kind of trusting that inner voice and really being able to, let go of ego and go to a place of someplace completely different. And I'm curious to know how you teach that to people, because we understand how to teach the theory. You've got books, you've got the research, you've got all of that. And I want to know more about how you get people to tune in and trust that process, especially when they're working with others.
It's not the easiest thing to teach, I can tell you. Usually people that come to experience this type of work have already made that step to trust on some level, and some intuitive level.
Yeah.
So that is a blessing. You do get the occasional person that comes that hasn't made that and wants to come and find out what it's all about. So I start by teaching the science and the theory, because I always say to people, when we get, sort of down to part 2 or part 3 of this course, and you're toning over somebody's body and I'm asking you to trust your intuition, I want you to think back to the science and think about what you're actually doing. Mm-hmm. So for me, the science, the nature of resonance and vibration is really, really important. So my teaching of the intuitive side very much depends on how I've taught the theoretical side. Giving people visuals, exploring the nature of entrainment in nature, in grandfather clocks with their pendulums, the tuning fork experiment, all of these things, so that people understand that everything is vibrating, including ourselves. Mm-hmm. The person in front of you on the couch is a massive vibration. And we look in this in finer detail. Obviously, it's not as simplistic as a massive vibration. There are other pulses and various things. But I get them to see themselves as vibration. Therefore, the voice that they are creating is vibration. Mm-hmm. And they are going to be applying that to another mass of vibration. So this is key to start with, because if they can visualize that for themselves, then when they stand in front of a body, a client on the table, rather than going into fear, I don't know what to do, so go back to what you're seeing. What are you actually seeing? Yeah, a body on a couch. Yes, but what are you seeing beyond the body on the couch? Yeah, what are you really seeing? So first of all, that is paramount, because if they can see everything as a mass of moving energy,
or even sense it. I suppose some people aren't as visual, but that's what you're meaning. How do you sense what's in front of you from that vibrational experience?
Exactly. So it's very much having that understanding. And then, for me, with people that are new to this, it's very much about play. So we have case studies. The students have to do 36 case studies. You're not expected to be, a practitioner during those case studies. You're expected to be exploring and finding out. So like a child, if you watch a child playing, you watch a child in the garden, or you watch a child with another friend, and they're just playing and they're just happy. They'll be doing one thing, and then suddenly they'll just dart off somewhere else and be doing something over there, and they'll run back, and their thoughts, they're taken where they want to go. They don't think about it. They just feel drawn, except when they're told what to do. Yeah, exactly. They feel drawn. And so when you're working over a client's body, there is a feeling of being drawn to certain areas. So I teach this. I explain that there is a feeling of being drawn. Obviously, there's a demonstration, so that helps.
Of course.
And this feeling of being drawn is spontaneous. So I encourage students to actually be working with spontaneity, childlike spontaneity, to notice, first of all, obviously, the fluctuations in sound, but not to get too caught up about that. Because, yes, we will notice fluctuations, and it's amazing. And you think, hang on a minute, did my voice just fluctuate, or did I just make that up? There's all this questioning that goes on. But once that's there and you've got used to sort of sounding over somebody's body, to actually go where you feel that you're taken, rather than examining it too much. So it's very much like you said, handing over to this other side. It's this childlike side that we all have. Yeah. We all have it. We are all capable of this. This isn't something that, some people are healers and some people, will never be.
Yeah, of course.
We are all healers. Yeah. We are all capable of this. But we all have the ability, to switch our brain state. But actually, really, when we're in intuitive mode, we're not in everyday doing mode. So, when we're out driving the car or doing the shopping or, getting from A to B, we're in beta mode. And sometimes, sort of heightened beta mode. And we're left brain, we're getting everything done. When we're working over a client's body, the therapist is actually very much in a meditative state. Mm-hmm. The hardest thing is actually to maintain a meditative state while still keeping enough left brain that you're
still pulling in. Exactly. That balance between heart and head, or left and right brain, and all of
Well, I tend to teach it as left and right brain because I think, there's a lot of terminology in, let's call it, the new age world, you know, live from the heart, not from the head. But what does that actually mean? So for me, it's about explaining to students what this terminology means. What do we mean, lead from the heart? What do we mean? So, it's very much about being able to hand over to what I call a daydreaming state. You know, if you're to stop your day and you say, I'm just going to sit on a bench for 10 minutes and I'm going to stare.
Yeah. A lot of that's trance and hypnosis. A lot of it's just going into that state where it does switch.
Just switches.
It just switches, yeah.
And that's, if you can switch between those states, then you can work with intuition. Yeah. That's the bottom line. So it's really training people. I say to them, that the course is about learning stamina. It's about learning to be able to go between these two brain states. Yeah. And then you can help and train, which is help guide other people into that state. If you are firmly and strongly vibrating in that state, you will guide other people into that state.
Yeah. And of course, with the theory and the science and everything, I know, and I'm just throwing this out there because obviously we've done this, there are exercises to get you into that state. So it's not just, I hope I can get it from, switch into this, or I hope I can go back. Exactly. There are really very straightforward and practical things you can do to enter into that state where healing can take place, that meditative state, that daydreaming state.
Exactly.
That
and
allows
we practice
you to
that. And students have homework to practice that. Yes. And observe themselves in that state. Yeah. So the observation whilst you're in that state is really important, because that's keeping an eye on things, which is more doing mode, which is more practical mode, but observing whilst you are in an altered state. And that sounds sort of like magic, doesn't it? Like, in an altered state. You know, we're just talking about daydreaming states.
Which we all do, yeah.
We're daydreaming, sleeping, meditating, watching the telly, driving the car at some ways. You need your practical. In fact, driving the car is a perfect example, because very often people say, I don't know how I got from A to B, but their physical body did all of the practical things it needed to do, but their mind went somewhere else. And actually it's there we go. It's another one, driving the car.
There you go. This is
the
beautiful.
Perfect balance.
I love that. And I think coming back to that childlike and curiosity and play is such a great example of that. Going back to that, I would say intuitive and natural state of being. It's just like, I'm just going to be guided. I'm just going to follow. Kids playing by themselves with in their imagination, flittering around the garden. It's just such a wonderful thing. I remember watching mine just go from left to right, and it's like there's no logic there. It's really just about, as you say, where they're being guided. And interestingly, talking about entrainment and nature, it is being guided in a sense that everything somehow kind of aligns at some point, and you can be guided in those ways. I think this is really fundamental.
Did I answer your question?
You certainly did. I wanted to know about that intuitive side and how you teach people, because it's not an easy thing to teach when it's not as tangible. We can have a book of, we know the intervals, musical intervals, we know how these things relate in terms of vibration and ratio and frequency, but then what happens on the other side? Because I remember for myself, I would like to think I'm quite intuitive. I've always been very much about inner questions and asking for guidance inwardly. So coming into the course for me, it wasn't difficult. However, because there were new modalities and new ways of expressing things, I found what was helpful for me, it was to ask myself the what if question. And what if meant, what if this is what I'm really seeing? What if this is what I was really sensing? Yeah. What if this is what I'm really hearing? And going with that, if that's the case, then how will I then follow on? And trusting that is, rather than, no, am I really seeing this? Is this really happening? Am I really sensing this about this person in front of me? What if I was? Yeah. And I thought that was a really very simple way of just falling into trust, falling into intuition and inner guidance, so that whatever I did or didn't do was implied on the what if it was the case.
Absolutely.
Which is a really beautiful beautiful way for me anyway.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that's what you were doing.
Yeah, there you go.
And you always look so natural. So there we are.
Well, I do feel like I did have that connection, but like anything and anyone, you go through those moments, as we know, with the internal dialogues, like, hang on, this can't be real, but actually, what if it was? So it's always a great reframe for me. So feel free to throw it out to your next set of students.
Yeah, it's literally about gathering all of these little things, because different things speak to different people.
Without a doubt.
And, so thank you.
Yeah.
One for the toolbox.
Yay, yes. So, I mean, you spoke a lot about your work and the things that you do. I'd love to know, what is your definition of healing?
And I think earlier when you said you might ask me that, I said, how much time have you got?
Yeah, we can do the shorter version, but give me your version anyway. I don't mind.
Well, okay. So, I'll just draw back to at the very beginning of the course. We ask this. We say, what is healing? And simply put, healing is responding or giving to someone with loving intention. So if you're feeling upset or you're having a bad day, and I put my hand gently on your shoulder and I say, Simone, it's okay, it'll all be all right. Mm. That's a form of healing, because I'm trying to make you feel better. Mm-hmm. And I think that really is, for me, that's the definition of healing. It's about trying to offer something to somebody else to make them feel better, but from loving intention. So there's no, it's not about money, it's not about gifts, it's about offering something from yourself to that person and saying, I care, how can I help you? And I think the challenge there for a therapist or a healer is that they can then maintain that, but with a boundary for their own health and well-being, because we understand that we give as healers, we channel energy for giving as healers, but we have to also maintain our own energy, our own strength. So if you're working with, several clients every week, how do you continue to feel that way about them, know? But I think it's remembering that. It's remembering that very simple sort of...
serving with a healing intention.
Yeah, how can I make that person feel better today? And that, before a singing lesson, before a healing session, obviously before a healing session, it feels slightly more formal in that way. But hopefully, in whichever way I see people, whether it's for a singing lesson or healing or voice reconnection, whatever it is, there is that element of care. I think for me that's really important. I feel like I've done a good day's work if somebody came in, a certain way but went away feeling better. Yeah. Then I feel like I've done what I was meant to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. Could you share a story about a client that you might have worked with, and anything you feel like could be an interesting thing to talk about?
Gosh, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Isn't that typical? Well, I don't know. There are many things, and it depends on the context. Gosh,
how about one where someone came with a physical ailment, and how was that? How did you, not necessarily what did you do in the session, but what kind of things do people come to you with? And then, maybe how do they leave? Or when they leave, what's the change? Because you just spoke about that. For you, it is about making an impact, even if it's in a session or a small way. Now they leave feeling better.
Sure. Well, I suppose most recently, perhaps that's the easiest thing to draw on, in the sort of worst context, in that sort of serious problems. I've been seeing a lot of people, new clients with cancer, and it's so difficult for people because they're so afraid of what will happen to them, and usually they're afraid of what will happen to them whilst they're being treated rather than what will happen ultimately. so actually with the person recently, just really completely alone, and had the diagnosis, and had nobody else to share the fears or anything with, and just came for a singing lesson that day, which didn't really end up happening. But I think when she came, she'd had the diagnosis the day before, and just was in complete shock. So it was a case of first just listening and allowing her to speak, and just to speak about her fears. But after that, I actually thought, okay, so how do I remember sitting actually with her and thinking, how can I help her now? Because the medical diagnosis is always so gloomy, and fair enough, I understand, that doctors have to give a worst case scenario because that's their job too. Yeah. They have to do what they have to do. So I thought, how can I make this woman feel more positive about the future? How can I empower her? How can I give her tools that she can do when to stop her feeling like this? So I read her a whole chunk about sound healing and the work of Fabio Mamon, and how intervals and the interval of the seventh and the resolution of the octave, it sounds a bit technical, but had been used to destroy cancer cells, and how when a person uses their own voice, the research showed that actually the overall effect was more powerful, more positive. Right. So I explained a few very basically, and said, look, let me show you some meditations that you can do. Let me show you some sounding you can do. Let me show you some toning so you can control your breath. I said, at the end of the day, your attitude towards this is controllable. Yes, it's awful what's happening to you, and we of course we acknowledge that. She's still in that horrible, desolate place. Of course, yeah, but she can control how she thinks about that, however hard that might be. So we looked at toning some affirmations, we looked at singing this healing scale, and we did a little bit of that, and I have a CD with that on, which I gave to her. And then I just checked in with her, every couple of days, and she said she was doing that. And it was just about trying to reinforce that positive state of mind. I think when someone's had the ground taken out from under them, where on earth do you start? And I always make light of it. I'm like, I'm giving you a bunch of affirmations and some singing to do as your homework, Yeah. The poor woman has all of this other stuff going on. But she can control minute to minute. She can control how she feels in that moment. And those were the tools that I gave her. And I felt that that's what I could do for her. And she messages to say that she's doing all of that. And she's, and sometimes perhaps she'll text and she doesn't feel as positive. So I just send her a text back to reinforce, and just to, it's not, I can't cure it there and then, but I can give her things that have been proven and worked with, and she can try to do that for herself. And I think healing is really empowering a person to make choices that will make them feel better, will make their mind feel better, keep the thymus gland strong, keep the work of John Diamond, keeping the thymus gland strong, the will to live, the will to survive. It's very important. And if you can reinstill that in somebody, with tools, that the will to survive is difficult, and we all fluctuate with that depending on how we feel from hour to hour. So it's, so she was the most recent, I would say, and
so really it's taking responsibility for your own healing and taking it one moment at a time. Yeah. And then obviously, utilizing the tools and as we go back to the science and the things that we know work, and just implementing some simple tools on a daily basis.
And although, I really believe the science is important because we are of a scientific race, we live with that. And as much as, I meditate, I tone, I do all of I say again, new age for want of giving it a term. Yeah. I do it And I do it with absolute 100% belief because I've looked at the science and I've made sense of the science for myself, and I have answered all of those questions for myself. And I think it's really important, this lady in particular, highly intelligent woman, she needs to know why she's doing it, because if she knows why she's doing it,
just do this, trust me, it's going to work.
It's that is really important for me.
I agree. Which is great, because that's what we're taught, certainly in the College of Sound Healing, and being able to go through the scientific stuff, and there's so much research out there now that it's hard to miss. If you want to know more about this stuff, there's so much information out there, which is amazing. I just wanted to ask you a really quick question. This is tracking back to way back at the beginning of our conversation. You spoke about your own personal journey coming out of opera and the things that you went through, and not feeling like you were necessarily connected to your authenticity through voice, and you felt like you needed to change that. So I'm wondering, in reflection, if you think there are ways that people who are, of course, still in that industry, in the music industry, whether classical, operatic, or contemporary, who might be feeling, I'm being forced to sing this way, or this is not me, or whatever those kind of, things feel just not quite aligned. Do you have any tips now, because you've been through such a long journey after making your decision to shift, that would be helpful for them to not necessarily leave, because of course they have that choice, but if they decided to stay within the music industry and pursue it through that, that medium, what kind of tips could you give for really staying within that authentic sound and your authentic expression?
I would say, number one, be very careful who you surround yourself with in terms of teachers, coaches. Be very careful what is being projected at you from people that you trust. I would say that first of all, because I think, there are so many amazing performers, so many gifted people, and, they're incredible, and it's such a hard profession, and they work so hard, and they hone their skills and their crafts, and they need to feel supported by the people that are working with them. And to be working with someone that works from a place of love, actually, not from a place of fear, not from a place of not quite having achieved it for themselves, not from an ego place. I would say, if I had to do it all again, that's what I would do. I think even recently, sort of teaching in various places that I've been and worked with young, very talented performers, it's still so fear-based, and there's horrible things being projected at them, and they carry that weight on their shoulders. And I think that's the first thing that starts to make you feel like your sound doesn't fit, like you're not being authentic, because you're constantly having to deal with all of this negativity around you. And I think if you're not aware of energy and picking up on bad vibes and that type of thing, you're going home every day, or going to college, whatever you're doing, or to the theatre, carrying everybody else's crap, really. So I think I would be very careful to make sure that your thoughts are your own, first of all. I think that's the first step to getting back to being authentic. What do you think? What is right for you? Does it feel good? If it doesn't feel good, just have a little look around and see if there's anything else or anyone else that does make you feel good or better, because it's hard to go from feeling not so good to good, but better. A sense of relief, a sense of feeling, I guess it's what you said, being authentic.
I think that makes sense, that a lot of it is really coming back to self and being, it's all very integrated, coming back to self, trusting that, asking the questions, tuning in, and then noticing what's in your environment, what is actually causing this, the shift that's happening, the internal dialogue to take you down this path. And of course, we know with certain things in the industry, because if you are in the industry, there is certain ideas of, and I'm putting this in inverted commas because now everyone can see my fingers, but of what success is.
Yeah.
And in order to reach that level of success, a lot of people feel that they do need to bend or break or go away from, what's real for them. And while, yes, that might be the case for some, I mean, and certainly that's how some people live it, I definitely agree with you that there are other ways. And it really is empowering yourself, being resilient, knowing when to be flexible, because we are, we're not an island. We're in a space where we have to bend and adapt. But coming back to that, just tuning in and asking the question, is this my voice or is this someone else's that I'm hearing right now?
And being aware that, if you're around people or you're with people, whether it's teachers, coaches, friends, colleagues, whatever, you're with people and you think, it doesn't feel so good, then take yourself away and be with yourself. Because if you're projecting good, authentic stuff, people will come to you. But you have to build that power of authenticity, that belief in yourself. And then your resonance, your vibration will be so strong that people will come to you and you'll find the success that you're looking for by being happy. I think the profession has a reputation of being the industry of being bitchy, a little bit sort of, backstabbing. And it's difficult to cope with. But I think people that are real and comfortable within themselves and not constantly trying to appeal to others, if they're just doing what they do wholeheartedly, I think they're the ones that make it in a different way, because you can have all the success, or what is perceived success. Fame is perceived success. But if you're tearing yourself apart inside, then what's the joy? What's the fun? Surely we should all be enjoying this short time
that we have. Agreed. All about having that joy for me. I have to say that's definitely been an inner guide for a long time. If the joy is gone, I question it.
But I think that's really good advice. And that's what I'd say. If the joy has gone, and it's difficult for people because families are invested in their kids, and they're proud, and it's the way as a society we perceive performers, that's the only way. If you're on the TV, wow, you're amazing, and there's so much more to it than that. And so it's hard for people, and it's hard to be strong and individual. That's the hardest path, without a doubt. But I think it's the most rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, I'm so happy that I've had this time with you. Honestly, Alexandra, it's been such an honor to connect with Alexandra and find out all about her wonderful work. You can head over to soundrelaxationcenter.com, and you can also check out alexandra-rigazzi-tarling.com, where you can check out some of her music and all the wonderful work she's doing. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
And I really celebrate you and all that you are and all that you do to help heal others and to teach others to do that as well. And I'm so grateful to be one of those.
Well, likewise, I'm really very grateful to have seen you today. It's been too long, and thank you for being so wonderful and doing this.
Thank you. So I have a final question for you, Alexandra, and that is, what is your soulful sound to the world? A self prayer or desire that you wish upon the world?
Well, I think following on from what we said, I think strive to be whole. Strive to be true to yourself. There's power in simplicity. There's power in being authentic. So I wish that for everybody, that they find who they really are. They find the peace and the joy of who they really are.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much. So much love.
Thank you.
Thanks. Stick around to hear Alexandra and I spontaneously sounding together. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share it with your friends and remember to subscribe. From my heart to yours, sending you love, healing, and sound wherever you are.